Welcome to Media Moses Weekly, the weekly roundup of articles from our own Media Moses and from relevant entertainment news. Topics this week include Narnia, Far From Cancelled, The Art of Wingfeather, and Dragonslayer. But for now, what media experiences have you had today, Rebecca?
Hi, John. So a few weeks ago, maybe a few months ago, I mentioned that I was reading this book to the kids, The Story of the Greeks.
Yes.
We're still reading it. It's pretty long, but we found some other sources that were very interesting about the Greeks. We found a website called Memoria Press, which I believe is
Yes.
a classical homeschool.
Classical Christian education. Yeah. They have a
Yeah,
great YouTube channel.
yes. And so they have a playlist, which I believe is called Greek Men of Virtue. And so some of the people we've been reading about were there on that playlist. So we
Mhm.
started watching that, and that was really good. It's adding a whole nother level of understanding to the kids when they're hearing names mentioned in the book, and then they're hearing the same names mentioned in the video.
Mhm.
So that was really cool. Um, Learning about these characters, I call them characters, but like learning about these people and their personalities and their characters and how they were received by the Greeks and how they were rejected by the Greeks has been really educational, really interesting. But while we were there on the YouTubes, we discovered a channel, an architecture channel by a man named Manuel Bravo. And bravo, bravo. It's
Mhm.
very good. It's extremely good. We found a video called Understanding the Acropolis.
Oh, yes.
And, or yeah, I think it was Understanding the Parthenon, actually.
Right.
And it was
But isn't
basic.
the Acropolis where the Parthenon is resting? Is that how that works?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. So um it was amazing. Like he takes footage of the actual location while he's there and he's talking about it, but then he also does digital walkthroughs of
Right.
what it would have looked like. And it was so inspiring to see how the Greek buildings and temples were designed always for effect. They were designed to create an
Mhm.
impression on a person, like you're walking through a narrow um,
Right.
colonnade to come out into a certain place where all of a sudden the Parthenon is suddenly in view, and
Right.
it's enormous, but it's at an angle, and
Yeah.
the angle that it's at makes it look even bigger and more imposing and more beautiful. And
It's almost like early Western feng shui, right?
yeah, I guess so. Yeah, and
So feng
it's
shui is not just an Eastern concept. That's what that
yeah,
means. But I mean, isn't this guy you were talking about, isn't he like a architect sort of person?
yeah, yes.
Yeah.
He's an architect, and I really appreciate that I'm learning history from the perspective of design. And to me,
Yeah.
that gives a whole nother level of perspective to, what the Greeks were like and what they valued. And
Yeah. Yeah.
so that was
Well, and
really cool.
architecture is a great way to eh, relate to that and also to combine art with history.
I know.
Architecture does that really well because architecture kind of doesn't change as quickly as many of our other forms of media or our forms of art. It slowly grows and changes because of limitations in technology.
Yeah,
And and our technology then was quite restrictive, but powerfully beautiful
yeah,
with how it manifested in architecture. Yeah.
yeah. So the unexpected joy of my high school years was that I got to take art history classes, or that I was required to take art
Mm.
history classes.
Yeah.
And it was so like enlightening to me. Like I enjoyed it so much.
Mm.
And I remember, just feeling like I was the only one who enjoyed it. Like it was so good.
Yeah.
And it just gave
I
me a
felt like
whole
that quite a
new,
lot in school.
yes, it gave me a whole new perspective. So
Am
Yeah,
I the
so
only
this
one that everybody, anybody else? I was more than once in two different schools most artistically talented because I was one of the
yeah,
only kids who liked the arts.
I know that's always when you go into art class, you're like, yay, it's art class. And everyone else is like, oh.
Well, it wasn't even that appreciated it. It was one of the few things I could do.
Yeah.
I don't enjoy math except for geometry,
Yes.
and everybody else hates geometry. And I don't enjoy like a lot of literature except that where it's artistic and creative. And I mean, I enjoy it, right? But I didn't necessarily perform well, right? Because I was always doing creative stuff. Teachers were like, "Oh, you can't change these things around." And I was like, the masters do it. So, why shouldn't we learn from that?
Yeah.
And so, because the models I was always looking at were the artistic models, not just the the people who are like, "Oh, this is the standard way of doing English grammar or whatever." No, I was looking at the poets, and what the poets did was change stuff around all the time. But it's true, as an artist, you have to learn kind of where to break the rules and where not to. One of those rare people. And it also I enjoyed history when a lot of people did not enjoy history. And isn't that kind of I think some of the discoveries you made this week about the Greeks, right? Isn't this a result of us trying to get more into the history side of it?
Well, we've been talking a lot about history in our homeschool
Yeah,
and, what makes a good history curriculum, what, like, not just what do we value, like, that's important too, but like, how do you, I don't know, I grew up with a history textbook with questions after each chapter that I
yeah,
had to answer on a piece of loose leaf paper. And it was just
right.
boring. Like, it was so uninteresting
Yeah. How do you make history
and it felt so
stimulating and
irrelevant.
interesting? And how do you give them a passion for history?
Yeah.
Because history is essentially storytelling. And
Yeah.
so like storytelling can be you could tell a story as dull as dishwater if you want to, or you can tell a story with vivacity and passion and beauty. And also remembering that the things that often encourage us to enjoy history is things that relate to our modern time too. You know, in other words, things that are relatable about the past, right?
Yeah.
So like things that the in the past that relate to today and how it's changed or how it's been different, or like in other words, bringing greater context into history is really important. It's not just a bunch of data. It's not just some guy way out there on a timeline somewhere and they did
Yeah.
something supposedly that was great, but you don't relate to it.
Right.
All of that is a big mistake with teaching history. I think you really
Right.
have to make it a story, first of all, and because the Bible is history. And so yeah, sure, if you're teaching the Bible in a really boring way, like, oh yeah, that's part of the story of the Bible. Let's read it because we have to. Like, yeah, you're gonna bore everybody to tears, including yourself. But like if you relate to it and think about it in terms of what is God trying to teach me, you can do the same thing with history. And what is God trying to teach me through this story of this supposedly great person in history, or through these events that occurred, or through this war, or through this conflict, or through this great technological advancement? What does this teach me? And often you'll find like little connections. As you study history more, you'll find connections throughout history that kind of string together concepts. So whether it's in the field of war, or whether it's in the field of politics, or just great leaders, I think I was even relating Alexander the Great to Abraham Lincoln recently, wasn't I?
That
And
was
I thought
interesting.
that
Yeah.
was not a connection I had ever made before.
Yeah.
And so, like as a teacher, as a parent teacher in home with a homeschool, you also are challenging yourself to see the beauty in history when you're reading it. And there's always going to be new things that pop out, because Alexander the Great was an unconventional leader for the Greeks, and Lincoln was an unconventional leader for Americans that came before that period, right? Because Americans were thinking in terms of the states and an association of states, right? Similarly to the Greek city-states, right? And so Alexander the Great, in a way, brought together the Greek city-states behind this big campaign to bring unity and spread Hellenism throughout the Middle East. And Lincoln essentially spread the unity, right? The union, they called it after that, um, across the country, where we are uniting under these principles that slavery is wrong. And we're keeping the country united based on these principles. And so a lot of people like that, and a lot of people don't like it. It depends on how you look at what the culture was before that person, you know? And so you can kind of relate to both sides of it. When if you were living in the period of Alexander the Great, you could relate to either side of that. You could be like, well, we were Greeks that valued our freedom, and that also meant my freedom to not pay attention to the other Greek city-states. I don't have to do what they did. And so in a way, that the creation of empire makes that a lot harder to do that. And similarly with Civil War, like it's forcing people together in a way that you might not fully appreciate at first, but then later you might. Who knows? But I found that interesting. And often leaders are like that. They change things up. People at first don't like it, but then later they appreciate it in a different way, you know. Um, but yeah, I'm glad that you found some of these new resources. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, really good channel. Manuel Bravo.
Manuel Bravo.
He's got a video called Understanding the Parthenon, and then he's got one called Understanding Athens, which was great.
Yeah, and as
Well,
an architect, he's got really great perspective on it.
yeah. And
Um,
it's not just architecture, it's urban design, urban planning and design.
Design is so important. The principles of design really don't change that much through each artistic medium. They really don't. Color plays an influence, composition plays an influence, texture plays an influence, usability, the practicality of it plays an influence. All of these things play an influence, and even something like film or book writing could be compared to that.
Yeah.
But the principles of design are powerful, powerful things.
So what about you, John? What media experiences have you been having this week?
Well, we had one together, didn't we? Where we
Yeah.
watched Dragonslayer,
Yeah.
a 1981 fantasy film, man, of that old style where it's almost the 70s still. You can still kind of
Hmm.
feel the 70s on it with the kind of like the foggy lens
Yeah.
and
And the soundtrack felt like the
the
70s too.
soundtrack felt very 70s, yeah. Kind of silly while at the same time epic, if that makes any sense. You know, not as whimsical though as the 80s, but still trying to be both silly and epic at the same time.
Yeah.
That they couldn't quite find that middle ground yet, but they were really looking for it. But still good. It was a lot of fun. The aesthetics of that film are great fun. It's ILM, right? So the people who did the creature design and all this stuff is all physical, not one bit of visual effect, as far as I know. Maybe some of the fire effects might have been some kind of overlays or something, whatever you might call it, that they used to do back then, where they basically overlay it over the film and then re-record it. And that's obviously one of the oldest techniques in the book. But what they did in with this film, of course, the dragon is like sometimes like a suit in the sense of like an arm. And so they would design a dragon that's a dragon head or claws or wings, and they weren't connected together. They were just extensions for the human being to bring inside the frame. and which gives you a sense of scale, right? And also keeps the audience guessing with how the entire dragon looks together, which builds a lot of suspense. Sometimes these techniques that we look back and we watch something, we're like, oh, they never showed the dragon. That builds more suspense and fear. And you also realize that they didn't have the ability to show you the whole dragon. They and so that was used by necessity as a technique, but it also works quite well. So like building suspense by not ever showing you the entire dragon is a powerful cinematic technique. But they did also have I wouldn't call it a life-size one, but they had a really big one, because the actor had to get on top of it at some point, to try to kill it. And sometimes they do show the head. And so that's a really big, what would you call it? Uh, Not a robotic arm, but it was kind of like not a, I keep thinking armature, but that's very small. Would you call it a large armature?
I don't know, maybe. It was definitely a large piece that they had to build, but it looked great. It looked, I would, I have to say, I think the dragon was my favorite part,
Yeah.
because it looked really good. It was definitely scary. It definitely
Mhm.
gave you like chills. Um, and it was just really well done. And it was just so nice to see something that was tangible and not,
Yes.
AI or computer generated or something like that. But it was, um, you could touch it.
Yeah. And that's going to have a great effect on the actors and their performance as well.
Yeah.
In fact, when they started going visual with visual effects and with computer graphics, when they started doing that, they started realizing that their performances were very wooden and not very emotional.
Hmm.
So to this day, when they use computer effects, they actually use a physical model. And often this takes place right inside of a motion capture suit, right? So actors who are maybe creatures or what have you, they're embodying this other character. They're inside of a motion capture suit, and then they are interacting with the actor playing opposite them. And this gives the actor playing opposite them more authentic reactions because they're actually reacting to a thing there, right? A person. But when they were using, computer graphics when it was first happening in the late 80s and early and the 90s, they were often acting across nothing. And these performances would become very wooden and lifeless. And they had to realize in many ways they had to go back and return to a real life, something closer to a real life performance, which is with actual physical props and physical things, right? And it just improves your performance. So this is pretty much undeniable. So there's some things you just can't evolve out of the human being, like, and why would we want to anyway? So, we love physical, tangible things and we interact with them and we have relationships with them. And so why would you, remove that from us? It
Yeah.
doesn't make sense. So I find that this kind of design um, aesthetic is just as vibrant today and just as powerful and meaningful today as it was then. And I think that today, if they did the same thing, this is one of the thoughts I was having while I was watching the movie. There's no reason why we can't make this today for just as cheaply as they did it back then.
Yeah.
And there's no reason we couldn't do it. Not one reason. It's just that Hollywood doesn't do it anymore. And they'd rather stay with the technology they're using now and spend $250 million. Do you see how it doesn't really make sense? Not only are the performances better, but the craftsmanship. could be revitalized to make these kinds of models and these kinds of extensions and armatures or whatever. And and you could probably even have some robotics and it wouldn't make it that much more expensive probably. But no need. You could make things like that they made here and probably do it even better. I mean, I think you, of course, you could do it better without spending that much more money. So now you liked the dragon. I thought the dragon was a little, not great. I think it could have been a little tiny bit better. And it's probably because I've seen that kind of dragon a lot.
Okay.
Yeah. But it's not a bad dragon. It's not bad whatsoever. But as you know, I was very complainy about the story. And I think you were too a little bit, weren't you? Yeah, it's these stories, these, let's see how I can word this properly. The kinds of people who wrote this story have been in Hollywood for so long and they have so much influence in Hollywood that they believe that their worldview makes so much sense that they'd be willing to destroy just about any Western civilizational myth you could destroy by turning it on its head and undermining it. And so a lot of people probably wouldn't think of this. I don't know why, but I've realized that not everybody knows myths like I do. But I think it's pretty clear if you study that story that they are turning St. George and the dragon on its head, the myth. And so, but you'd have to know a lot about St. George and the dragon to do that.
Yeah.
So the funny thing is this takes a sort of malevolent personality behind the scenes to do that.
Well, the thing that was kind of frustrating about it for me, and I'm sure you have a lot to say about this as well, but it felt like every time they were moving towards something sort of hopeful and pure, it would get just, you know, trashed, or the hopeful idea would just get like removed and
Right.
um
Especially in terms of traditional Christianity. Yeah.
yeah, dashed to pieces. Yeah. Um and the way Christians were portrayed, like it's just so tiresome, like um this ridiculous like preacher type character, which doesn't even make sense because it's the Middle Ages. But he's just acting all dramatic and crazy, and then he gets like eaten by the dragon. Like it's just
Right.
so
It's silly. It's cartoonish.
exhausting.
Yeah.
And I'm just so tired of seeing that in movies. I've been
Yeah.
seeing that in movies my whole life. Like
Started in the 70s, I think. Yeah. The 70s.
it's like this is okay, this is a bit random, but I definitely noticed that cats are not liked in Hollywood movies. I don't know if you've ever seen this, but like
Yeah.
anytime there's a cat in a Hollywood movie, it's like hissing at someone or it's jumping on someone and clawing them, right? And someone's
Right.
like, ah, get the cat off me. It's the same with Christians. Like
Yes.
Christians are always portrayed horribly in Hollywood movies.
They're like under your foot somewhere. They're like, oh,
They're,
oh, it's Christians.
yes, they're like hypocrites, or they're just like, unintelligent, or there's just something,
Right.
they're just always portrayed horribly. And it's
It's
just
so ridiculous.
exhausting. And
Yeah.
like I was thinking, and of course I like where you're going with this, but I was thinking like, can we just make this movie again? Like, let's just remake this movie. And now we have like, I'm sorry, I'm just gonna be a little indulgent here. Can I just have a Christian knight like conquer this dragon and then win the maiden? And then,
Mhm.
we can all think about Jesus marrying his bride in heaven and
And by
overcoming.
the way, a maiden that's not a trans allegory.
Yeah,
You see how old the trans allegory is?
sure. Yeah.
Been around so long. I think it's been around even since longer since the anti-Christian thing. It's been around to me since the 1920s, where you had the Roaring Twenties and the women wearing the men's suits and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's been in music and the arts for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And often it was seen in Hollywood as kind of a curiosity or something
Mm-hmm.
funny or something somehow sexy or anti-sexy in some way, kind of like crossing your wires in your brain. And
Mm-hmm.
so sometimes you can just laugh at that and you don't know what else to do with it. And so it becomes a comedy. But Hollywood don't care. They'll just keep doing it until it becomes something serious. In this case, essentially the Uma character, which if you know St. George and the Dragon, Uma is the princess, the princess of the king of the village that is dominated now by a dragon that's killing them and eating them and destroying their village and terrorizing this village, right? In the classic story of St. George and the Dragon. Uma becomes the pure, snow-driven, um, allegorical reference to the church. And the church is seeking the pure, seeking the holy to go on a quest or go on a crusade to destroy the demonic influences of the devil in a community, in her community. And so in a way, she also represents Mary, right? Mary brings forth the Christ. And so Uma brings forth St. George by going and finding him, right? In the case of St. George and the Dragon, she has to go and quest for him. And she's a snow-driven perfect virgin, right? But that doesn't have anything to do with sex, right? What that has to do with is her religious devotion to God. So she's devoted to God and she's a good girl, right? Well, in this story, she is a he. She shows up as a boy in the beginning, and that's because you find out later her father made her dress as a boy so that she wouldn't be eaten by the dragon because there's a quote lottery that the town puts up to prevent the town's people being destroyed and eaten. They every 5 years give up a virginal girl to the dragon to be eaten to satiate the dragon's bloodlust. And so her father was, frankly, he was cowardly, but they didn't treat it that way in the movie. But that's essentially what he would be seen as in the medieval town, because not everybody was protecting their daughters from the lottery, but he was. And so he pretended that she was a he, so she would never be given to the dragon. And so why is it this is a trans allegory? Well, it's pretty clear if you watch the movie. The hero, who is a sorcerer in training, discovers that he is a she when he swims in the water, discovers her naked body. This is a PG movie, by the way, and you can see her almost entirely naked from the side and under the water, right? And so this is supposed to be the reveal that he is actually a she. But if you look closely, you can tell earlier than that. She changes the tone of her voice quite
Kind of
often,
obvious. Yeah.
quite excellently. She's an excellent actress, obviously.
Yes. Yeah.
She knew how to change the tone of her voice, and quite often you were kind of fooled by it. And she would sound like a guy sometimes, but she was the one who was guiding her traveling party from the village to find the hero, who was a sorcerer, not a Christian knight, right? So this is one of the other ways in which the story of St. George and the Dragon, which by the way is an anti-paganism story, essentially against witchcraft and against paganism. And so what have they done? They've eliminated, right, the Christian knight, and they've brought in a pagan sorcerer to do the job instead. I think they even referenced that in the story. They're like, who we really need is a magician, not some kind of silly knight to do this. And the sorcerer, who's actually the master, who dies in the beginning, not much of a spoiler really. He dies in the beginning. He says that the dragons show up because of sorcerers, and the dragons will go away when sorcerers go away. And so essentially they've created their own villain, right? But this is also revealing a secret of how witchcraft works. Witchcraft always creates the enemy that it destroys, right? And in doing this, it's actually the witches who dominate the village, not the dragon. The witches dominate the village in the similar way that the lottery, right, is dominating the consciousness of the social order of that village and causing them to kill and maim their neighbor for the sake of safety. Right. So that's actually how these things work. Curiously, they made it look like in the movie that they were against that lottery system. But actually, how paganism works is the lottery system. That's actually how paganism does work. And it's funny, they really tried to make that work to where they tried to pin that on the Christians in that village, but that doesn't really make sense. Like that, sometimes they made it look like the king was the villain who did that, which he kind of was. Other times they made it look like the church was the villain who did that. Um, and obviously it's portrayed as inhumane because it is inhumane and it is disgusting to do that, to sacrifice, right, to scapegoat the holy and the virtuous for the sake of the safety of your village, right? Which is essentially what we do with abortion too. So we give up the holy and the virtuous um, for our own sense of self and safety. And so that's the same tool that's used back in the day with paganism as it is today. But and of course, I think that these writers know that they're too smart to not know that. So essentially, it's a far more malignant kind of force behind these kinds of stories back in 1981 to turn the story of St. George and the Dragon on its head to where it's not an anti-paganism story, but a pro-paganism story. It's also a trans allegory, and it mocks and makes fun of Christians, and it's treated in a cute way. And I do like a lot of the production design. I liked a lot of the aesthetic of it. The aesthetic made me happy. I was like, man, we need to make more of these kinds of movies. I did like the spear, the Dragonslayer spear that they use. Oh, it's a beautiful piece of art. And as far as I know, that was authentically like a powerfully sharp spear, like in reality. Um, and you know, a very talented blacksmith made it. I'm sure, of course, they had a hero one and then also one that you could beat up and wasn't real. Yeah, it's very interesting that that story was basically trying to undo St. George and the Dragon and the meaning behind that myth. You know, even people who are pro St. George and the Dragon hardly even understand the myth today. So it really took somebody who was kind of a scholar and a scholar on the other side of the coin, right? So I think that they literally were a pro witchcraft writer and that they were people who were working towards that mission to make witchcraft acceptable at the time, an acceptable way of being, or even an attractive way of being. And so from the beginning, you're kind of like presented with these characters that are supposed to be charming and cute and fun, and the master sorcerer is presented as kind of godlike in a way, almost all knowing, and yet whimsical and fun at the same time. So very likable.
Yeah, he was a bit silly,
Mm-hmm.
and he often appeared to be not very good at his craft and making mistakes.
But that was just his
Yeah, he even had this
pretext.
hat, like this kind of like it was so ridiculous. Like his sorcerer
The snake
clothing
hat. Yeah.
was like so cheesy looking. He had this like fake snake, like it looked really cheesy, like surprising. Um, but then he wound up, all that silliness wound up being part of this like plan that turned out differently than what anybody expected,
Yeah.
which was kind of cool. That was kind of interesting.
Hmm. But they
Um,
were definitely doing their work to try to make him very appealing and fun and whimsical and
yeah,
powerful all at the same time. Kind of godlike. I really think that.
yeah,
And then of course all the Christian characters were made fun of and mocked and destroyed and killed
yeah, that was
in
such a
million
drag.
ways. Yeah. So it's very interesting. And then I think after we saw it, I was like, why don't we just make St. George and the Dragon
Yeah,
instead of always trying to undo these beautiful stories that have powerful, pregnant meaning, instead of always trying to undo them and then obscure the original story, right? It's like they're trying to always borrow and steal the original, like the power of the original, but then remove the very power from it while doing it. So I've talked about St. George and the Dragon and the power of that story and why it's such a powerful story. You can listen to my episode about St. George and the Dragon. I don't remember the number of the episode, but it's back there. You can look in the archives of cultural warfare. Yeah, I think it's a decent explanation for St. George and the Dragon. I could talk about it again at some point, but a lot of people, though, I think when you say things like, we need to just make St. George and the Dragon again, words like again, or we just need to do that, like when you say those things, I think people think that that's very boring, right? They think you're just trying to literally do the same story again without anything new, without any artistry or creativity applied. So I want to kind of qualify that statement a little bit and say, as an artist, you cannot just do that. As an artist, if you're an artist, your technology, your technique, your aesthetic, all of these things can and should change whenever you remake a story that's old. So what you have to do is understand the original story so well that when you remake it, it almost doesn't appear to be the same story. And yet people know it is. And so you have to know what to change and what not to change. So the essential bones of the story cannot change because otherwise it's not the same story. There's a reason that you want to keep the same story because that reason is universally meaningful. In other words, there's eternal truths. And so you recognizing that there's eternal truths makes that art conservative. It makes it universally powerful, universally relevant to every human being on the globe. So that story will be successful. And it's also universally helpful to mankind. So not only will people watch it and enjoy it, but they'll actually get something meaningful and useful out of it. And it will lead them to life in Christ. So, there's so many reasons to make conservative art, but what we can't do is take that story and then apply no artistic principles or artistic value to it to update it and make it interesting to audiences of today. Because that's essentially what you need to do. As an artist, you have to both be obsessed with conservative values and meaning in myths that don't change, universal uh, and powerful myths. But you also have to be obsessed with today's techniques. And so today's techniques use modern technology. they use today's aesthetic. There's a different color palette. Like there's a different way to use props. There's a different way to have performances. There's a different way to use colors in your palette. And all those things change in time. And so when Christians don't pay attention, Christian artists don't pay attention to all that, they really are doing all of us, all of mankind, a disservice by taking this beautiful thing, this gem, and putting it in this wrapping that is ugly and disgusting. They're essentially telling you that there's nothing valuable in there. I mean, it's like taking $1 million and just sticking it in like in your back pocket or something, and then just walking around with it. And oh, whatever, I got $1 million here. People do not do that when they have something valuable. They put that thing in a beautiful container that's strong, powerful, protective, meaningful, so that when it's presented, it means something, you know? And when you care for the things that you love, people know then that you love it and it's valuable, right? You put these things in the bank because you don't want it to get lost or damaged or destroyed. And that bank is really strong. And that gives all of that meaning because it means you respect it and you know its value. And so when we as Christian artists don't respect our own myths and stories and powerful universal tales that really can guide us to God, it really says something. I mean, mostly it says that we're not artists. There's nothing wrong with not being an artist. Just don't do that job. Please stop doing that. Give it to people who are real artists and who want to really value that story. And so I'll talk more about this in a minute, but that's the main topic for today, by the way. Conservative art is the hardest art. There's a reason for that. I hope that we will study some of these old fantasy movies again and talk about the aesthetic and talk about what makes them powerful and interesting and also what makes them a little cheesy sometimes. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But there's good fun to be found in that.
Yeah. Definitely.
Some of the other stuff I guess I talked about this week. There's an article on MediaMoses.com. Let me see if I can go there. Hopes that Netflix Narnia was delayed or canceled appear to be unfounded due to lack of resolve to fight. So what does that mean? Let's take a look. Okay. So due to lack of resolve to fight, it means that people have not been fighting against Netflix's Narnia. And so they believe it's been delayed or canceled, but it's not. It's kind of like you drop your guard because you don't think there's anything there, and then really there is something there. Now let's see if I can explain this more. When you lack that ability to assess a true threat, how can you fight the enemy? Sometimes you can't even see the enemy at all, leading to a lack of resolve to fight in the first place. In other words, people don't really understand the enemy, which is why they don't fight. Seeing the dividing line between the cultural vandals in Hollywood who desire to cover up the Christology of Narnia. Well, let me just, first of all, before I start reading this, let me say what's happening here. So people thought that Narnia was canceled because there was a delay in filming in July. And so they, I think, are assuming that Netflix is dropping Narnia. And I'm going to tell you right now, that is absurd and silly. And the reason that they're falling for these kinds of theories is because they really don't know their enemy. They think that their enemy is a pushover. So now I'll read some of this. Seeing the dividing line between the cultural vandals in Hollywood, such as the ones making Narnia, who desire to cover up the Christology of Narnia, and inserting toxic feminism in its place. And those who appear to be hoping in vain that Netflix will suddenly stop being who they are keep showing the vast cracks between their conclusions when new facts come out. These are their ideological differences showing. One believes nobody could be as twisted as Netflix, and the other believes that nobody could be so naive as to think that these long gestating myths couldn't be changed given enough money changes hands. So Hollywood believes these myths can be changed, and all they have to do is pay enough money, and they can do it. So let me read on. Of course, they could be changed if we allow it. After all, the unprecedented amount of rights given to Netflix from the C.S. Lewis Company appear to be given for the paltry sum of around $250 million estimated. Do you think the C.S. Lewis Company cares what they do to the story now? I don't. In other words, they'll let them do whatever they want to Narnia because they paid them an actually large sum of money for all the rights. So I don't remember how long that they have the rights for. It could be 7 years, 10 years. I don't remember. It's a long time though. But does every Western Christian really have their price? Would we deny Christ for that sort of paltry sum? Many would, but not us, which is, of course, why we worked months ago to encourage people to sign the petition to stop the vandalization of Narnia's hero, Aslan, who is meant to represent Jesus Christ to the world of Narnia and in the universe of the books. Here's our article and petition. You can still go there and sign. I think it's been months and only a few hundred people have signed it. Still, a few hundred people. That is just shameful. That only a few hundred people in the world care about Aslan. Can you believe that? It's absurd. I continue. As stated, however, the Western civilizational vandals in Hollywood have tried and will continue trying to replace Christ with a feminist retelling. In this case, by using Academy Award winner Meryl Streep to voice Aslan. We warned you that these folks will never give up on their ideology because it really is a competing faith that they have. They must be stopped from trying to destroy the Christian faith's heroes, and we must see it for what it really is, a thinly veiled heretical cult working to corrupt Christianity. They might be succeeding. But those who live within this eternal hope that is unfounded say that maybe Netflix and Gerwig have given up. This report from That Park Place claims that this delay means the project may be doomed. But delays like this happen in Hollywood all the time. And it's true, especially with big projects like this. They also released a video that says the same. So they do talk about
It now looks like Netflix may be prepared to delay the next Narnia movie on the way to theaters and streaming. But why? Why would they do such a thing? Well, what if we told you that it could be because they cast a woman to play a male lion who represents Jesus Christ? Today, we'll explain to you why this movie must go under the knife so that Netflix avoids another cuties situation.
So they talk about this, the things I've been talking about, and they talk about the absurdity, just the fact that they've done this, the absurdity that they've done this. And therefore they believe that how could they continue? It's too absurd. They're probably going to cancel it. Right? If that doesn't sound like hopium, I don't know what it is. How many other projects has Hollywood gladly tried to vandalize and done so quite effectively? Didn't we just describe how Dragonslayer was an upending of St. George and the Dragon? And they did quite effectively to make it look like, oh, we don't need no Christian knight to do this. We can use it with our pagan witchcraft. We can do it with our pagan witchcraft. While explaining in the movie that sorcerers created dragons, and dragons create sorcerers, and they work together. Isn't that funny? It's like a trick. Sleight of hand. And this is also sleight of hand. What they're doing here, they're going to make you believe that, oh, this is just absurd. There's no way we're going to continue this. Nothing to worry about. And then they're going to do it anyway. Just like they did with all these other stories. And people like us, you know, like we already know the myths. We already know the stories. We've already been told the stories. We already love the stories as they are. So we're not concerned about ourselves and our own knowledge and our understanding of these stories. We're concerned about the people who don't know the stories. I'm concerned about the people who don't know the myth of St. George and the Dragon when I watch Dragonslayer. And so those people will be fooled into believing that this version of St. George and the Dragon is so much better than the original version. Why would you even need that old myth? This one is so much better. Same thing here, guys. Why would you even need C.S. Lewis's version of Aslan, which is about Jesus Christ, when you have this one with Meryl Streep, the Academy Award winning Meryl Streep? Why do you need a tale about Christ when you could have, whoa, a lion being voiced by Meryl Streep? That's so cool. And the performances and the aesthetic and the artistry is so much better, right? This is the reasoning. And Hollywood will fill you with hopes that their technology and that their storytelling ability is so much more important than the truths and the values behind these tales, behind these myths. Because Christians can't create good stories anyway, right? It's absurd. That must mean that there's nothing there to offer you. That must then therefore mean there's no real value in these stories. They just call them values, right? That doesn't mean there's actually any value there. And why don't someone even asked me today on Twitter, they're like, why don't values evolve? Why can't values just evolve? I could tell you that, but uh, but like,
Because they're based on something that's true.
because they're valuable.
They're based on something that's true, and something that's true doesn't stop becoming true.
Bingo. That's essentially what I told him. But yeah, so man, it's making me want to tell you right now. But I can't because I got this up here. And we will talk about that in a minute. So let me go back to reading this story a little bit. So these guys are kind of believing this is absurd. How could this continue the way it is? It's probably going to go away. But it's just going to go away, make it go away, right? Believe that it's not a big deal in your head, and then it will just go away. In the case of WWW Pro and That Park Place, we believe they are putting their best hopes forward. But the truth is there is no real evidence that Netflix is putting the films and series under the knife. In fact, Hollywood at large has continued in their willingness to offend the public in the form of the fans who care about these stories, regardless of any pushback it may receive. We've seen this over and over. Hollywood has also been not only willing to enter into unflattering controversy, but to also lose millions of dollars for the sake of what? Their ideology. Is this controversy and commitment to message something that Christian and conservative artists have been willing to enter into? No. Instead, they run away scared of the fight. Is that a real Christian? No. Shameful. So not only does the evidence show that Netflix would typically be willing to move forward despite delays, but there is no real evidence they are stopping either. In fact, Narnia Web has already reported that they have evidence to the contrary of what That Park Place is saying. That's because electricians and crew members have already been reported to be on set at Shepperton Studios in the UK in the last few days. See Narnia Web's latest on Narnia below, which came out only days after this WW Pro video above. So only days after that video, bam, Greta Gerwig's Narnia gears up to film, location shoot planned in England. So no, just a little delay does not mean they're scrapping this millions and millions and millions dollars worth of project. Okay. Greta Gerwig is not in the business of failure now. She's one of Hollywood's biggest directors now. Do you think they're just going to peter out? No, don't be silly. Did we really believe that Netflix would turn tail and betray their own religious ideology, which has given them so much power in Hollywood so quickly, when only a few hundred or thousand measly people have squeaked in opposition to them? No, of course not. We've spoken before on cultural reform in Hollywood, both here at Media Moses and on podcast. We spoke on it as manifested in actual history, not just as a form of political speculation, intense hopium, or desired wish fulfillment. No, you can visit my podcast, I say here, Cultural Warfare, or read our articles here. Within this article, there's also a Cultural Warfare podcast about the Hays Code and Hollywood reform below. So you go to this link to my article. In fact, I'll just go to it. This talks about President Trump's appointed ambassadors to Hollywood. Sure. And here's my little podcast, episode 50, where I say, can Trump reform Hollywood? And this really isn't even about Trump much, which is funny because when I put this podcast up, it got like half the amount of views my normal video gets. I think it's literally just because I put Trump on there. It cut the amount of views. But I don't even really talk about Trump in this video. I talk about reform in Hollywood and how that can take place through something like the Hays Code in history, right? So I talk about that. I say, without this knowledge, I doubt that these men will make much of a difference, but we can always try. So I'm giving people advice on how they can actually reform Hollywood as done through history. So what do we say in these talks? The National Legion of Decency, previously called the Catholic Legion of Decency. I'm talking about the history now, okay? In the late 20s. The National Legion of Decency would line up hundreds of Christians and Catholics at a time to give their pledges to not watch Hollywood smut if they continued to make it. And this movement took the nation by storm. I'm not talking about a few hundred people signing a petition. I'm talking about hundreds of people at a time giving a pledge to not watch Hollywood smut. This was millions of people. Millions of people. And the country wasn't even half the size of the population now that we have now. So it's a far larger portion of the population than we know. I say here, because this movement was eventually in the millions of numbers, and it was the cultural watershed moment that brought the nation to reforming Hollywood through the Hays Code. We all knew things had to change, and they did. So I talk about how it could be, Hollywood could be censored. There's no reason it couldn't be censored according to the Bill of Rights. And there was a legal precedent that said that the government literally could come in and censor Hollywood if they wanted to. But Hollywood was smart enough to not allow that to happen. So what did they do? They policed themselves by creating the Hays Code. This code, which was slowly formed through various iterations, was the self-imposed standard Hollywood needed to prevent the government from cracking down on them. The code, though mocked by Hollywood media types and smut flick vixens, eventually became the theatrical rating system we see today, which also found its way into the TV and video game rating systems, right? Like the MPAA and stuff. It was a standard that prevented propaganda, inspired in-depth conversations about art, and encourage understanding for the true purpose and value of great stories. That's what the founders of this movement said they wanted to do, and that's what they did. They literally were making a standard that prevented propaganda happen in the arts, inspired in-depth conversation. They're not just being arbitrary, oh, finger wagging. No, they want to inspire conversation about what good art is and an understanding of the true purpose and value of great storytelling. But eventually it became subverted and seen as a suggestion that could be ignored. These ideas are still things we talk about today, though. And so the code's impact is still felt to this day. I talk about, all right, I leave a link here to Wikipedia, and they talk about the National League of Decency that I mentioned. So we discussed how the Hays Code transformed Hollywood, bringing it from the softcore porn offerings in the Roaring '20s to the big blockbuster works like Gone with the Wind. In other words, doing this actually made Hollywood more profitable. Also, they were making blockbusters after that. Why? Because more people wanted to watch their flicks. They were making films for families now. The stuff we could all watch, right? Not just the little arty flicks for people. You know, the curiosities, you go in the corner and look at your little Nickelodeon, you know, like, no, it brought it into the mainstream. Hollywood was actually lacking the vision to make better, more uniformly accepted pictures. They lacked vision, guys. And so what this code did was literally turn these Roaring '20s softcore porn offerings to big blockbuster works like Gone with the Wind that engaged the public on whether or not you could say damn in a film or not. Now people, instead of thinking about like, oh, should I close the eyes of my kid as there's these porn films shown to our kids, now it was, should damn be included? I don't know. I mean, it really had an impact. Um, and so they were talking about that, and also whether or not it was meaningful to the story, because that's the new understanding, is this shouldn't be just done for just to do it. It should be done for a purpose, right? There should be value here in the story for us to consume. So that's what the Hays Code did. People had to really think about this. So it forced people to really think about their entertainment. So the transformation was palpable, I say. Many forms of profanity had been eliminated from Hollywood cinema by that time due to these kinds of robust discussions taking place after the code had its effects. Smut film went to a new market or had to mask its intentions. And regular viewers were seeking out better storytelling instead of cheap thrills due to the code. All this meant that this reform was working as intended. But now the fear is certainly manifesting clearly that there is really no legion and no other cultural backlash against the kind of decay we are seeing as manifested in Hollywood propaganda. We can see this all very clearly if we're looking for it, right? There is no Million Man March now or pledge to not see Hollywood smut happening today. Just a few complainers online like us, right? So will these few complainers change anything in Hollywood? Probably not. Even that Million Man Legion barely changed the Hollywood filmmakers and media in the '30s. But that wasn't the point, to change all those people in Hollywood. The point was the nation itself was to be affected by the Legion's insistence to have real moral standards upheld in Hollywood and around the country. And they succeeded. Obviously, Hollywood can shoot their smut in their basements, but it was not to be distributed within normal avenues and set up alongside the family films and the films that general audiences go to. The point is not to force people to obey your standards. The point is to have a general effect on the moral standards of the nation. That reform or resolve needed to hold the line of moral decency in America may have already been decayed to such an extreme that each and every crevice within the mouth of our nation may be diseased and riddled with cavities. Good luck eating a steak of nutritious, meaty cinema when we can barely defend why Aslan should be a male lion. We deserve what we get after the chances to bring change stop being given to us on a silver platter. And we intend to keep bringing them to people on silver, gold, and platinum if we can, since we still believe in this country. Thank you and support our work with paid subscription. So yes, we believe that what we're doing here makes a difference, and we think that you can make a difference, and we think that we could end Narnia if we get together and do something about it. If we make a National League of Decency of sorts, or a National Legion of Decency, as they called it. I think league sounds better, actually. But but what we do, we need to have that kind of a movement, right? Not just a bunch of loud, vicarious people online. And then you look at the numbers and you're like, oh man, there's like 300 people that signed this thing. 300 people. Like, it's a big who cares moment. Like, that's pretty sad, guys. So Edmund is just staring at you guys. Edmund is like, why, where did they go? Why are they not fighting this battle? I think Aslan looks disappointed too over here. Pretty sad. Without the resolve to fight, how are you going to even know how to fight your enemy? You might not even fight them at all. You might just let them do whatever they want to our heroes. Pretty sad and pathetic, guys. Woo! Pretty sad. So, not to be all depressing, but you know, that's the story of Media Moses this week. I try to make more than one every week, but there was some other things I did this week, but one of them was actually really cool because it was me reading to my daughter about the Art of Wingfeather. There's a book around here somewhere. It's the Art of the Wingfeather saga, season 1. And it's pretty fun. It actually goes into how the whole thing got made. Not just how to make art, how to draw or whatever. It's not like that. It's not like instructional on how to create art or something. Although that that could be useful for some people. It was more of like an introduction to their whole project. And they talked about how Andrew Peterson wrote 3 novels and he was with different publishers. And then eventually he met this one guy who was an animator who was like, I want to help you turn this into an animation. And they made a little like proof of concept, like short. And then Angel Studios and them got together. There's a few other steps in there that I'm missing, but it's a really cool story. And it's also very artistic. I think it's teaching our kids that some of these big projects take many, many, many steps. And it's not so much that it's about that it takes so long. That's not really I think the main idea, although that could be important because sometimes it does take a long time. And so be encouraged. Just because it's taking a long time does not mean there's anything wrong with you, right? But the thing is that there's many steps. There's many curves and turns in the road. And sometimes we're tempted when things don't work out. You know, you get that one curve or that one turn that's difficult, and you're thinking, I never thought I'd be doing this, you know, like a year later. And then you realize, oh, that was an essential part of my journey for me to do that. Right. And I should be open, not just to, you know, make an animated movie, but to make the original, books was important. Andrew Peterson is not originally even a book writer. He was a musician. And so obviously he's like an artist extraordinaire in many ways, but like, to have this kind of aesthetic and to have been doing this for such uh, a long time that he's been doing it, and such beauty in his Wingfeather stories is pretty inspiring. So it's a very inspiring story just in general. But if you haven't seen Wingfeather Saga on Angel, go take a look at it. It's like art. It really is beautiful and really fun stories. But also, I think don't just see the animation. The books are really good. I mean, they're really funny and whimsical. Like they're valuable, especially
Yeah.
for kids. At that certain age, it's really good stuff. So we're enjoying that because our daughters are learning to be an artist and a writer and a an illustrator. And so, we are actually very close to starting our campaign for Boxland. Well, that's a little sidebar there, but like one of the reasons we do this thing with the Art of Wingfeather with our daughter, and we learn these kinds of things, and we bring them to her and we talk to her about them, is because she's just a great little artist. We're proud of her. She's doing impressive stuff, really fun stuff. And so this is part of that journey, right? Is how to get to the next level. Maybe to turn her little characters into a little book. So we have a little book, a kid's book. We started out with a kid's book because it wasn't too much, right? At one time, just kind of one of her stories that she had already created. And I saw the beauty in it. I saw the great potential for it to be a little kid's book. And so a few things got changed, a few things got added, removed. We talked to her about, how this could be a really good kids book, and and the demands and the requirements. Like we used Canva and all this stuff. And so yeah, it's basically ready to be made into a book and to be crowdfunded. So and sent to you guys. So we're gonna start that crowdfund soon, probably in the next week or two. We're gonna be getting that crowdfunding going. And we'll talk to you about all the steps that's coming in the next few months. We haven't decided like how long the crowdfund is going to be, and we've decided it's going to be probably about $1,000. So a very small, minimal crowdfund just to pay for our expenses and pay for all the shipping to you guys. And she can hopefully build her fan base this way. To have a little fan base. And then each new project, it could get a little bit more ambitious as we go along, right? And so she'll be able to write bigger stories and she'll be able to do bigger things. And just like the Art of Wingfeather, right? It's about inspiring her that she could write a longer book or she could do an animated series at some point. Like that's really what we're hoping. So all of this stuff kind of plays into these really important projects that we're hoping can happen. And our daughter is worth it. Her work is already really good. She gets better every time she does this stuff. So I'm really excited about that. But yeah,
Him
so
too.
yeah. But yeah, the art of Wingfeather. I actually think it is around here somewhere. Let me see if I can get it. Here it is. This is just really charming. So I've been showing her so here it is. They talk about like so much of what like this really gives you an example of the difficult kind of work you'll have to do because our kids are all learning to be artists. And this is not easy work to make. Like this was not just like done on a computer. No, this is like painting, real paintings that they did. And then the character work they did, quite impressive. They talk about, in the beginning, they talk about, and they say thank you to everybody. They go into like all the stuff they did to make this happen. And it's pretty cool. I think it's great. It's very inspiring. And it talks about C.S. Lewis, the things that inspired them. And I've been reading it to my daughter every morning for the last few days. I'll probably be done tomorrow because there's not a ton of reading, but it's a lot of fun because it's a lot of pictures. So we do a little bit of reading and then it's like 3 pages of pictures. And so it's a lot of fun for kids, I think.
Yeah, the art and the character design is really, really so good.
Yeah.
So unique.
Something really cool happened today. Also, just before I close out this week, got contacted by some more people to do interviews. I can't talk about who it is yet, but it's really exciting. Some of these people are known people. And so I'm really excited because these could be interviews that are much more like higher profile and with real social issues attached to them, which I'm excited about. And there's one of them is for a book and one of them is for a film. So I'm just kind of like, oh, this is what I want more. And it's really exciting. I'm hoping to set it up for next week and maybe the week after. We'll see.
It is exciting. And there are people that were on your radar already.
Totally. And they just out of the blue messaged me.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, wow, you can do that? Yeah, apparently this can happen. So that is great. It's, it's really exciting.
Yeah.
But man, I do want to get to the place where I can do like in-person
Mhm.
interviews. That's just going to be so great when I can do that. Um, so yeah, cultural exodus hopefully will be more of that in-person interviews. And I wished that I could have done that more at Realm Makers, just couldn't do it. I basically got sick during that whole thing. And it was really difficult because I wanted to be there doing those things more than anything. And it just was so difficult that I couldn't do that. So, but what I did get to do at least was talk to Jason Moody, talk to Stephen Burnett, and so many other great people, hoping to set up interviews from that. But it looks like a lot of these interviews are just going to have to be like through Zoom or something, which is what we do, like this is kind of what we do. But yeah, so that's okay. Like we need to do more interviews anyway, so it's a good thing. So that brings us to the topic. Conservative art is the hardest art. I hope you've enjoyed your week here at Media Moses. Our Media Moses articles can be found on MediaMoses.com. Paid and unpaid subscriptions are available. Next up, our main topic over on Cultural Warfare with Jon Croft. Oh, that's me. See you guys in a minute as we transition over to that channel.